Let me go ahead and share my screen for a minute. There we go. And I'm gonna not talk about context. You know, we usually start these meetings by talking about kind of the context of where we are in the year and what's coming up. But we're going to be talking about that in the last half of the meeting. So I'm just going to focus on the agenda. And
charged to parents.
Are those
it sounds like someone might somebody is not muted. There we go. That's great. Thank you. So the most important piece of context that I am going to say right now is that tomorrow, Monday morning, is the first day of the 2023 Georgia General Assembly. And so we're going to take advantage of the timing to do a preview of what to expect during this legislative session. And we are really fortunate to have two of our favorite state legislators with us today, and that's Representative Dr. Jasmine Clark and Senator Elena Parent. And we are so fortunate that they're going to be giving us a preview of the General Assembly. And then the last half of the Troubler meeting is really a first pass at looking at 2023. And we'll be talking about the general calendar, and we will be talking about how we're going to be setting priorities for Necessary Trouble this year. And we're going to be talking just a little bit more in depth about Necessary Trouble and the Georgia General Assembly. So we are really delighted that everybody is here. And PJ, I'm going to turn this back to you. And PJ, you're muted.
Okay, how's that? Can you hear me? Okay, great. At this time, we're going to ask Michael Beach to introduce our first speaker. Noting, I want to let you all know that the question and answer will follow both speakers, and we're asking troublers to put your questions in the chat for each speaker. Michael?
Great, thanks so much. Happy New Year to everybody. I am really pleased to introduce the representative from Georgia House District 108, Dr. Jasmine Clark, who will be starting her third term in the State House. Yeah, thank goodness. So Necessary Trouble's had a long relationship with Dr. Clark, as you know, with our members out there in full force to get her elected in 2018, 2020, and recently in 2022 with her reelection last year, where we were heavily involved. And thanks to everyone as part of that, over 1,750 doors knocked on, as well as a lot of other work to put in to help her make that transition and be reelected. So Dr. Clark has a PhD in microbiology and molecular genetics, works as a lecturer in microbiology and human anatomy and physiology at the School of Nursing at Emory. And so equally important, she's also a mother of two public school students, which really brings that mom and scientist together, strong, vital, and unique perspective to the State House. Being a scientist myself, I think having a voice on science is really critical in our legislature. So it's great to see that. Her legislative agenda has been focused on education and voting rights, reproductive rights, environmental protection, common sense gun reform, and criminal justice and healthcare. And in the House, she served on the Banks and Banking Committee, Budget and Fiscal Affairs Oversight Committee, House Higher Education Committee, and House Interstate Cooperation Committee. So a very busy agenda for her. She also serves as Vice Chair of the Gwinnett State House Delegation and is the Secretary of the Executive Board of the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus. If you've watched her speak at the State House, I think you know how passionate she is about our community and her constituents, and you feel the same. I certainly did when I was watching her as part of the last season of canvassing. As part of the Necessary Trouble canvassing, you know, I remember speaking to one of her constituents in a new part of her gerrymandered district, so it was a bit more difficult this time for her. This voter had seen a sign for Dr. Clark, had taken the time to actually look her up, and she said, oh yeah, I researched her. And, she really was clear that Dr. Clark was the voice and the person she wanted in the legislature, and couldn't get a sign in her front yard and talk to her neighbors soon enough. So it really brought home how important the work that we do is, and how important it was to reelect Dr. Clark. Um, you know, Basically, I think with all of this, we want to welcome her here today, congratulating her for winning again in 2022, and look forward to hearing her legislative preview. But congratulations again on the win and your third terms.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I always appreciate Necessary Trouble. And I cannot thank you all enough for all of the work that you did on the campaign trail to get me where I am. As many of you know, it was slated to be a very, very, very close race. I was slated to only win by less than a percentage point, but also with the possibility of losing by less than a percentage point. However, in this election, even with lower turnout than we would have liked to see, we outperformed all metrics, all expectations. We outperformed the top of the ticket. And I cannot say enough how much Necessary Trouble played an integral role in getting those types of results. So, for those who knocked on doors for me, I want to say thank you. For those who phone banked for me, thank you. For those who wrote postcards, thank you. And seriously, this is, I owe you all so much just for everything that you've done for me since 2018, and again, recently in 2022. And so, now we are the day before session. And so we are about to hit the ground running. Well, maybe not running so much. So if you follow the legislative session, then as you know, the very first few weeks of the first year of a new session is a little slow rolling. And then if you add UGA football into the mix, apparently that takes a lot of precedence. So we are probably not going to see a whole lot of activity or movement until about 2 weeks from now. But tomorrow is our swearing in. We get sworn in tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. So those who want to maybe tune in, or if you have the opportunity to come down to the Capitol, it will be bustling with people and visitors and things like that. But we're really looking forward to, getting this, getting things going. I no longer actually serve as the vice chair of the Gwinnett delegation. However, I do want to point out that I was appointed the policy chair for the Georgia House Democratic Caucus. So I will lead a policy committee that will really focus on, number one, helping new legislators with policy that they would like to, put into action, really helping them, make sure, kind of think through their bills past just the concept phase. Along with that, we will really be vetting policy that is moving through the chamber and moving through the committees, and also looking to people like you and across the country for good policy that we should bring to Georgia. And so I'm really excited about that role because it really allows me to use a lot of my strengths and allows me to really focus on policy and really help my new colleagues along. Speaking of new colleagues, in the House alone, we have 24 new Democratic electeds out of 47 new members in the House. So that's 180 out of 180 people, almost 50 of them are going to be brand new, or, some of them are returning. And so, we don't really know what to expect. We've also got a new speaker, or right now a speaker-elect as far as on the Republican side, and very likely to be our next speaker. And, John Burns, he is definitely the better of the choices that the Republicans had. Having Barry Fleming as our speaker would have been pretty tragic, honestly. So I'm glad to see that. But it's, because of that, we have a new speaker. We have so many new people. We're going to see some changes in the committees and possibly committee assignments because of that. So, we're not really exactly sure what to expect. We hope that we can be a lot more functional than what we're seeing in Washington. I know that we will very likely see legislation having to deal with healthcare because we've had hospitals closing, and now even people on the Republican side of the aisle have to admit we have to do something. We are likely going to see legislation dealing with reproductive rights. A lot of that has to do with the back and forth with the courts about HB 481. So unfortunately, this is going to feel like deja vu a little bit, especially if you were there during the HB 481 fight in 2019. We have to figure out what we're going to do with a $6.6 billion surplus. So it's another thing that will be the subject of many conversations and many debates as to how we spend this money and what is the best use of that surplus money. And again, this is surplus on top of rainy day fund. This is not something we can just put in the bank. It has to be used. And so the question is, how will we use it? And what is the best way to use those funds? So those are just a couple of things. I know you have another speaker, so I don't want to take up too much of the time, or I don't want to take too much time away from Q&A. But if you all have any questions for me or any concerns or anything that you want to let me know before I walk into the Capitol tomorrow and get sworn in for my third term as the state representative for Georgia's House District 108, I am open and all ears.
PJ, I'm kind of figuring we're going to do all the Q&A at the end. Is that right?
Yes, that's what,
Okay.
yeah. So, and we want to thank you, Dr. Clark. We will have question and answers after Senator Parent. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to thank you and thank Michael. And we're going to ask Karen Davenport to introduce our next speaker. And still, again, reminding troublers that you need to put your questions in the chat.
Thank
Karen?
you. Thank you, PJ. We are so excited to have State Senator Elena Parent join us today. Elena's core beliefs kind of focus on family, making the community a better place to live, and the actions that she does in her daily life always are putting forth the importance of faith and public service. And truly, she has been a public servant in our legislature for many years. She was elected to the state Senate in 2014. She represents District 42, which includes portions of Central and North DeKalb. She is the vice chair of the Special Judiciary Committee and a member of the Education and Youth, the Judiciary and Rules Committee. She also has been appointed to serve on the Georgia Code Revision Commission, the Georgia Public Defender Standards Council, and the Public Defenders Council Legislative Oversight Committee. She's formerly served as the vice chair of the campaigns and fundraisings for the Senate Democratic Caucus, and currently serves as the chairwoman for the Senate Democratic Caucus, as well as a member of the Senate DeKalb delegation and of the Working Families Legislative Caucus. She previously served as the state representative for District 81 in DeKalb County in 2011 and 2012. And she continues her public service work as executive director of Georgia Watch, the state's leading consumer rights nonprofit. She began her career as a litigation attorney with the and she is serves on the advisory board for the Olmsted Linear Park Association, and was appointed in 2020 to serve as an Emory ambassador, having previously served on the board of visitors for Emory University. So we are so excited to have her join us today. She has numerous awards and recognitions. Probably one of her best, I guess, is probably being married to Briley and having 2 sons, ages 10 and 8. So thank you, Senator Parent, for joining us.
Thank you, Karen, so much. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. It is wonderful to see such an excellent turnout out of this group, although of course I'm not surprised. You all have been hardworking, engaged advocates going on 4 or 5 years now, and let me be one of many to say how much I appreciate it and how much I admire the work of Necessary Trouble. So I'll go over a few other issues that my wonderful colleague, Representative Dr. Jasmine Clark, did not touch on, or at least that I did not hear her touch on. I hopped on a couple minutes late, and also look forward to answering your questions. So I wanted to add a tiny bit more to the discussion on the budget. We have the biggest budget surplus that I've seen in my tenure in state government, and possibly the biggest that we've ever had. You know, once you think about, I haven't actually run the numbers, but once you think about just the inflationary value of currency, knowing that we have $6 billion or more in our reserve fund, it's hugely substantial. At the end of the Great Recession, we had 100 million in the rainy day reserve fund. And so obviously, I think all of us support having money in reserve, in surplus. I think that is an important thing to do. It is meant to be used in a crisis. And so even though there were really draconian cuts during the Great Recession, actually it wasn't Governor Deal, it was Governor Perdue really for that initial period, and then Governor Deal and the legislature did tap into that fund to try to make the pain a little bit less bad for Georgians during the Great Recession, something that I think we probably can all get behind. Well, what's interesting here is that we actually, the reason our reserve is so big is because we have an allotted percentage that we're not supposed to go above in terms of our reserve fund. And the reason really we're above that, and the reason that can happen, is that Governor Kemp has this extraordinarily conservative state revenue officer and a state economist. So he puts forward his projections and has since Governor Kemp was sworn into office on what he thinks the revenue figures are going to be. And he basically always just has them coming in extremely low. And then, so they are beating, so not only do they beat expectations every time, which then, Governor Kemp and the others can tout as their excellent management, it also means that it's requiring more money to be put into the surplus that really could be spent on other items. The other thing is just, a major difference in ideology. Some of the money, of course, was coming from COVID relief funds, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, et cetera. But that money will not be reallocated, of course, from Washington, right? They were sort of like one-time big chunks of money to help us cope with COVID. And Governor Kemp's view on this appears to be that he does not want to really spend the money on anything that would be an ongoing program or require ongoing appropriations, because he doesn't want to have to come up with the money to keep sustaining that expenditure after the federal government isn't sending the money anymore. Instead, he has favored trying to utilize some of the surplus to the benefit of Georgians by basically doing refunds or rebates. And that's what he's saying again, like he wants to do another tax rebate that will run $2 billion. I'll have to do the numbers on how much that would be per tax-paying household. maybe about 500 to 750 each, which ends up costing $2 billion. He also wants to reinstate a property tax relief measure that was in state law, but went away during the troubles of the Great Recession. And then he doesn't, at least he's not saying yet that he wants to do anything with the rest of the money, just saying, hey, I don't want to put anything into any ongoing programs because we might have to then come up with the money to keep it going. And they really have they've done a lot of tax cutting in recent years. And I don't know if there will be another proposal to cut the income tax rate. We did just do a really big tax cut and a flattening of the income tax last session. I'm really hopeful that they don't do any more. The one they did last year, I think, could end up proving pretty damaging to our revenue numbers down the line once we don't have the COVID money. And perhaps that's why he's wanting to save this money, is because he thinks it could ultimately be needed for ongoing state spending when their tax cuts kick in, unless money comes in. We're just going to have to see. I have not really supported those tax breaks. I felt like Georgia really still has significant work to do in human capital investment and infrastructure investment. We're a laggard in many sort of human wellness rankings, as well as our infrastructure, water, sewer, broadband, streets, et cetera. So transit, how could I leave that one out? Right. So I felt like, look, we're not a particularly high tax state. I think that this money, instead of giving $500 to every family, this money would be better spent for the good of the community in one of those areas I just mentioned, or others, of which there are many. So, I wish there would be some pressure on the governor to try to make some progress in one of those areas with this extra state money that we have right now. And I'll certainly be advocating for that. Another issue is going to be whether or not there are reforms to the runoff system that we currently have. We, as everybody knows, I think there's only 2 states that have a runoff system like ours. It has racist origins. It is, in my view, anti-democratic in an important way. That important way is that for many runoffs, the turnout of voters is a lot less than during the general election. We've seen, everyone's pretty focused on the US Senate runoffs that we've had the last 2 cycles, and those while turnout did fall from the original vote, both of those saw still a really substantial percentage of voters, which is great. I mean, that's what you want, right? The reality, though, is that these are both nationally and internationally watched contests with millions and millions and millions of dollars being put into them. But there are runoffs for everything. There are runoffs for each of the 236 legislative seats if one is required under that scenario. That's more rare, but these runoffs will be like 10% voter turnout. And so then you've really got a very, very small fraction of the voting population making the decision on some pretty important individuals to represent them. So Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, has come out and said, look, I think it's time that we reform this. It's very expensive. Doing the runoff is very expensive, especially with the shortened runoff period down to 4 weeks, which is part of what they did in SB 202 instead of from 8 weeks. It was incredibly taxing to elections officials. It's very difficult to get people to work. Obviously, you're talking about the Thanksgiving and Christmas, Hanukkah, all the winter holidays in there. So look, getting people who want to work and work themselves to the bone on this very quick turnaround for major elections is a very difficult thing. And as I mentioned, costs a whole lot of money. Not everything went as smoothly as it should, although kudos to those that worked really hard to make the election runoff happen as smoothly as it did. So I think it's probably because of all the complaints, or partially at least because of all the complaints that he's hearing from elections boards and elections directors at the county level. Raffensperger did put out a statement pretty quickly saying, hey, I think it's time that we reform this. Oh yeah, let's throw in there that lines were actually pretty long, right? For the runoffs, and many people were waiting several hours or more. I know at my early vote location, the wait was typically like at least 45 minutes to 3 hours. And that's a lot to ask of people. Like, if it doesn't have to be that hard, if it doesn't have to take that long, shouldn't we try to make it where voting really is easier and more efficient? And I do think Raffensperger, while I have quarrels with him, I think he probably would actually rather see things run a little bit more smoothly. I think he's a little bit technocratic that way. And so he put out the statement saying, hey, let's reform this. And he threw out some options: ranked choice voting, dropping the threshold that would trigger a runoff from 50% to 45%, and potentially there may be some others. So I don't know where, if anyone's drafting a bill, I imagine that we're going to have discussion. I've always been really interested in ranked choice voting, but what I would really like to see, and I fear, of course, that this is not what's going to happen, what I would really actually like to see is us undertake a sort of serious analysis of our election system and the various ways that we could make voting safe and efficient and fair for everybody, and then reform it accordingly, not just looking at, oh, what does the eliminating the runoff do? Because the reality is, like, if all you're trying to do is eliminate the runoff, ranked choice can do that, but ranked choice, we only have 3 people on the ballot, right? We have the Libertarian and the Democrat and the Republican, and it's very difficult to get on the ballot in Georgia as an independent or under any other banner. So those are really the only 3 you can count on, and I'm sure most of us have basically only seen those 3 for generals. So really all they're trying to do is eliminate the 2 to 3 to 1 percentage person in the Libertarian, and then get down to the main contest between the Democrat and the Republican. I feel one of the benefits of ranked choice is that, to me, is that it tends to be less nasty and hopefully allow for more voices to be heard from the middle of the electorate. Because if people have to pick second and third choices, then their the voter's first choice maybe isn't bashing the second choice as much as they would to try to drive that wedge, knowing that sadly negative campaigning works well in the human brain, but it also suppresses the vote, right? It can cause a candidate to lose support, but it also might cause fewer people to vote because they just throw their hands up and say, the whole thing's disgusting. So apparently, studies show that it is a little less nasty because people are sort of trying to win over a broader spectrum, even if someone isn't going to vote for them number 1, maybe they're their number 2, number 3, what have you. So, I think those are 2 worthy goals of it: the less nastiness and the better reflection of candidates not having to be on one extreme or another, which I think is generally good for democracy. Because looking at our current landscape, it does seem like the middle is not reflected quite as well as would be ideal. And there are a lot of reasons for that, which we could talk about for a long time, but part of it's just extreme polarization in this era. Still, though, we could try to line the incentives up so that we better captured the middle of the electorate instead of sort of forcing people to the wings, candidates to the wings. So all that is to say that, to me, ranked choice, I'm a big fan, but I could see a bigger role for it in a primary, or if we allowed more people on the general ballot than just the Republican, Democrat, and Libertarian, because the benefits of it are just so much more limited when you're only dealing with that very small 2 or 3% that are going to back a Libertarian. There does seem to be interest in the 45%. Some prognosticators are saying they don't think we'll end up doing anything. Stay tuned. I think it's going to be a really interesting debate. And as I said, I certainly would love it if, we did do excellent work, and kudos to the late speaker, David Ralston, and others who spent 2 years on the task force to get together the Mental Health Parity Act that we passed this last session. It was a serious piece of legislation to try to get those with mental health disorders parity with insurance benefit along with physical ailments. That came out of a commission that was formed that studied the issue for 2 years before finally presenting, a very serious piece of legislation. gosh, wouldn't it be my and probably all of our wish that we would have the same seriousness and pay the same attention to doing a deep dive into voting and elections? However, I certainly will not be holding my breath that that is at all going to happen. Possibly we go to the 45%. Even that probably still would be a step forward as far as making the election more democratic. But yeah, but stay tuned. I don't think this is if we don't just go to 45%, I think that this is a conversation that will still be going on in Georgia for a number of years. Let's see. We are, of course, all still concerned about crime. I never talk about crime without talking about the fact that such a significant part of the crime that we are all worried about, both violent and petty, involves guns, and needing to get a handle on the gun violence in our state and in our country. I know that we will be, by we, I mean myself and Democratic colleagues in both chambers will be filing a number of gun safety measures that are supported across the political spectrum, such as, a safe storage bill around minors, a universal background checks bill, a bill to close the loophole whereby misdemeanant domestic abusers are still in possession of weapons here in Georgia. We've got to fix state law to deal with that. Extreme risk protection order bill, which is a red flag bill. I also intend to file a bill, and I know some Republicans are interested in this too. So we got to figure out, like, obviously I don't want to I want to help if there's a Republican that really wants to take this on. But, a lot of people were very displeased when Music Midtown felt that they could not hold the festival this summer, whether it was the organizers saying we just don't feel like we can keep people safe, or whether it was the talent, the musicians saying, look, if you can't guarantee that guns aren't coming into this, multi-thousand person venue with alcohol, we're not playing. It may have been the latter, right? And good for them, so I do think there is maybe some interest in at least closing that to where it's like, can we just please have some common sense? Like, no, domestic abusers should not be able to get guns. No, yes, we should be able to have a music festival with alcohol and tens of thousands of people where we try to ensure there aren't guns, but they've just been so bad, the Republicans, that is, on the gun stuff. Our laws are very much like Swiss cheese and have only gotten far worse since I entered public service in Georgia. So we just really have to keep working on this issue. And I think one of the ways to do it is to remind everybody that when they complain about crime, you're talking about it's because you've given everybody a gun and they're just saturated throughout everyone's homes and cars and jeans pockets. And, and every 4 seconds, someone's mad and they yank a gun out. And well, what do you expect when you've made it this easy to get weapons and you don't let the police even enforce the laws? They're not allowed to ask people certain questions about guns. Well, what do you really expect, right? I think it's, really in terms of the crime and violence, time to turn the tables on the Republicans, because frankly, in America, there is no getting a handle on the crime problem without getting a handle on the gun problem. So Governor Kemp is making noise about the crime issue. Of course, he's not laying one iota of blame in the ubiquity of guns in our society. He is saying he wants to crack down on gangs again. We did a gang bill a couple of years ago, so I don't exactly know what will be in this. I'm not saying that we've totally covered the agenda with what you might want to do to make sure that law enforcement does have the tools it needs to crack down on gangs. I'll be watching that carefully, but I just think we need to keep their feet to the fire on guns. Let's see. Yes, Governor Kemp's been very just returned to the traditional Republican tough on crime. Governor Deal did a lot of the criminal justice reform. Kemp has been far less interested in that kind of thing. Let's see. So it will be interesting to see if we take up any bills on education funding this year. The former majority leader in the state Senate, Mike Dugan, chaired a study committee this year dealing with our very outdated QBE formula. I think it's from like 1982, something like that. And it's funny, he noted, and certainly bears repeating, that the formula was passed into law before, anyone had computers in schools, emails, technology, IT personnel. It really is remarkable how old it is when you think about that, right? Plus, we're one of only 6 states that provides no weighting whatsoever for poverty. And we do know that for a myriad reasons, kids in poverty are going to need more resources to get the level of expertise and skills that we want them to have and success, and so that they can be successful in life and productive in our workforce. So if Senator Dugan, I think, was alluding to hoping this would be like a, hoping it would get done, but saying, hey, it may take a year or two. And that's really because there's a lot of vested interest in the formula, and everyone wants a bigger slice of the pie. And then the problem is that the pie is too small. I think our education funding is 38th. I would like to see us improve on that. 38th out of 50. We also, the last time we undertook a study about QBE to figure out if we were going to try to revamp it, it was under the Deal administration, and Deal wanted to do it. In contrast to this, I'm not sure how much Kemp has been involved in or is watching this particular study committee that Senator Deegan did. Deal put together a commission with like 30 people, legislators and others, and said, look, we need to take a look at this. But he told everybody, or his staff told everybody right at the outset, your inquiry is not at all to look into what it would actually cost to educate the children to the outcomes that we would like to see. Like, that is off the table. Don't even start there. So they were completely hamstrung from the very beginning. And that's, of course, because they didn't want to know what the answer was. Well, as long as that's going to be their attitude, you can only expect kind of modest progress. And I don't know. I mean, I'd just be surprised if they went all in on some sort of progressive new re-upping of QBE rather than tinkering with something or tinkering around the margins, because, like I said, the governor has $6 billion sitting in reserves, and all he wants to do is give out rebates. Like, there's no okay, wow, we've got all these problems with, and let's talk about education. We're 38, our QBE is 40 years old. Let's really see what we can do here to really make this the next phase of, a new phase of excellence for Georgia schools. Like, that's just not, there is no desire. I don't notice any interest in anything like that in any of our departments at all. I mean, yeah, they want it to be good enough. Don't get me wrong. I don't think, like with the maternal mortality thing, the 1-year expansion of Medicaid, that really, that was done over the course of 2 years. And to my mind, really only happened because the headlines got so bad and it was so embarrassing that we were #1 for maternal mortality in the entire country for years running, that finally they were like, okay, I guess we need to do something. So like being like 38 is like good. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just think like some of us that think government should try to do a little bit more to set the stage for success of people and economies, expect a little bit more. And I think some of the guys down there and the people, Governor Kemp for sure, are just like, this is good enough. This is cool. Like, we want low tax. And we don't think extra money is going to solve any of these problems anyway. So that's kind of their attitude, in my opinion. All right, let's see. I'll just mention a couple other things very quickly because I know it's 4:42. We hope that maybe there will be an effort on some of these absentee landlords, institutional investors buying up whole neighborhoods, and tenant protections, as well as, part of that same issue relating to affordable housing and homelessness. We have no minimum standards requiring owners to maintain their rental properties, much less to keep them decent, safe, or habitable. And so all you have is this, patchwork of local ordinances, and then underfunded code enforcement at the county or city level that could kind of go around and try to enforce these things. And there's also no allowance in Georgia law for withholding rent due to habitability problems. We did do a bill a couple years ago that provided a process to fight back against retaliatory eviction. Like if you were complaining a lot about the habitability of your space, and the owner, the landlord is basically like, this person's a pain in the butt. I don't want to deal with them. I don't want to make these repairs. I'm just going to evict this person and then get someone new in, and I'll do that to them if they speak up as well. That we did do a process on a couple of years ago through some good work by various people, including the bill sponsor, Sharon Cooper, Republican of Cobb County in the House. But far, that was like a little baby step. Far more needs to be done to make sure people aren't living in, rat and sewage and crime and squatter invested properties. It's a particular problem as well, leading to transiency, fires, deaths, transiency being a huge impediment to children being able to learn because they're like bopping all around, to different complexes, none of which are safe. And, you can kind of see why. And so that's tied into like this whole thing about like, well, we're not waiting for poverty in QBE. You can see just like children that are really in that circumstance where their families are just like totally hanging on by a thread, and they are very impoverished and they're in these horrible conditions, and they are, going from one complex to another and possibly at times homeless in between. You could see how, it expecting that those children perform particularly well in school without a lot of support is probably not very realistic. A lot of these landlords are out of state and or private equity owned too. And therefore it's that much harder to get to like enforce any law against them. We hope that there will be further discussion on Medicaid expansion. The closure of Atlanta Medical Center has really sent a jolt through all of our hospital systems. I know I represent Emory, and they are extremely concerned. Grady is extremely concerned. The rippling effects from the political malpractice decision 12 years ago or what have you to not expand Medicaid are ongoing. I do think it will happen at some point, but I don't know when that will be, and I doubt it will be this year. But right now we've had this kind of public health emergency addition to the rolls during COVID. And then the thing is, when we end that, some huge number of people will get kicked off. So that's another thing kind of staring the Republicans in the face that they're going to have to try to grapple with. Behind the scenes, there are some state workers, agency heads, really doing some good work along with public health advocates and hospital system executives to try to pull down as much federal money through the Medicaid system as we can, and to increase our reimbursement rate. So all that is happening. It is happening more quietly. It's not a public vote to expand Medicaid, but Kaylee Noggle at, I think it's at Department of Human Services, and some others are doing some good work. Okay. It's 4:47, so I'm going to stop there. We have so many issues, and this is even before we even gavel in. Sit tight to figure out what among these rises to the top, as well as others that Dr. Clark and I probably couldn't even fathom right this second. But I know that we could take some questions now. How do you want to handle it to our wonderful organizers?
Okay, Becky is going to handle the question and answer period. And before I turn that over to her, Senator Parent, we wanted to let you know that we really appreciate you coming on. I always enjoy when you speak. I always learn a lot. I saw you yesterday at the forum at the Sanford Center. You left before I asked my low-hanging fruit question. Okay?
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
So just know
I
that's
apologize.
okay. I put it in the chat. Okay.
Okay, good. All right, I'm ready now. Yeah, I apologize.
All
I was
right.
like,
Karen,
I was splitting time between my son's basketball game, and I was like, all right, I'm leaving 3 minutes early. But now I didn't know until now that I missed the highlight of the whole thing with your question, BJ.
Okay. And again, I want to thank Karen Davenport for that lovely introduction. I want to thank you for bringing Miss Parent on. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Becky for the question and answer.
Thank you,
Very
PJ. And let me say how lovely it is to have both Representative Clark and Senator Parent here. And I think that they're probably our longest term necessary trouble relationships. Representative Clark was the first candidate that we worked for as a group. And I remember gathering in our upstairs living room, and Senator Parent came to try to talk to us to help us figure out how the heck the General Assembly worked. And somewhere we have a videotape of 2 parts of her trying to guide us through it. And it was the most complicated thing we'd ever heard. So much gratitude to both of you for sticking with us for so long and for all your service. And there were a lot kind of some clusters. I'm going to apologize in advance because we are not a chance in the world we're going to get to all these questions. Senator Parent hit on a lot of the categories. Let me start with some of the large questions. And Representative Clark, would you speak to, what we know is, unfortunately, we are still in Georgia in the position where Democrats cannot pass bills in the General Assembly unless they have some amount of Republican support. Are there any issues or bills that you can see being proposed this assembly that have the chance that the Democrats would propose that have the chance for some bipartisan support?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that every year we do have bills that can be supported by both sides of the aisle. Actually, a lot of times, a lot of bills that do pass are bipartisan. There's at least one Democrat signed on there somewhere. I think we'll see that when it comes to just your normal I guess everyday type of bill, nothing controversial. You might not see a lot of Democratic top signers. So you're not going to see a Democratic sponsored bill necessarily on the House side, but you will see some bills that are, Republicans and Democrats on the bill together. I think there are some conversations being had about exactly what to do with Medicaid. I mean, it really is happening. And I know that sounds like a pipe dream, but I mean, it really is something that has been on the hearts and minds of a lot of people. And with hospitals closing, there are communities that are feeling it, and they're just trying to figure out what exactly is happening. And so I know that the new speaker, or the presumed speaker, is open to having those conversations. Now, what happens, we don't know, but we are at least open to having those conversations. I know Representative Imani Barnes has a free school lunch bill, and that one has support from both sides of the aisle. Any bill having to do with reducing crime, with the exception of bills that talk about guns, then you're probably going to see some bipartisan support. I will, however, warn that we should be careful about exactly what's in those bills so that we are not actually doing more harm than good. And then I would also say that both Democrats and Republicans got a lot of heartburn about the runoffs. And so I do think that you will see some bipartisanship in trying to figure out the way forward for runoff elections in Georgia. And then the last thing I'll say is mental health. As Senator Parent talked about, we had the Mental Health Parity Act, but we're not done. That committee is still very much working, and it's still got more things that it needs to do. And so we're probably going to see mental health legislation as well. So there's going to be lots of things that are working on. And I know sometimes it feels like, oh, well, if you're in the minority party, you're not getting things done, but that's not necessarily true. It's just we're not getting the recognition for the things that we are doing. Really good Democratic bills, really good bills that are sponsored by Democrats get stolen by Republicans to get passed, but they get passed. And sometimes Democrats just swallow their pride and say, I don't care if my name is on it as long as it's for the good of Georgians. And so that's what we see a lot of times, especially on the House side. We're a little cutthroat over there in that if they see a good idea and they see a bill that everyone will can get behind, they'll just take it. And Democrats in general have, we don't like it, but we'll accept it again because it's for the good of Georgia.
Yeah.
So you'll probably see a lot of that, and you can be on the lookout for those types of things.
Great, thank you. And kind of along those lines, what are the most powerful ways that volunteers can help help support your efforts? And this is to either one of you. Representative Clark, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll start by just saying, there's a lot of power in having people come to the Capitol and give testimony. And now this year, we're going back to pre-COVID procedures. And so I do believe we will have the ropes again. And so because of that, I know that coming to the Capitol is not always the most convenient thing for people, but if you can, coming, and especially coming to committee hearings, I think will be really good for them, people on the other side of the aisle, and just all of us to hear from constituents about how they feel about the things that we're trying to get passed.
Great. Senator Parent, anything you'd add?
And oftentimes we're in this position where those of us that represent the immediate area around the Capitol and out quite a ways are actually all Democrats, right? And so it's easiest for our constituents to get down, and hardest for some of these rural districts, some of the conservative Republican held rural districts. So a lot of times I try to have my, most engaged, best organized, most persuasive constituents go talk to a few of the Republicans, because a lot of it's stuff that we already all agree on.
Yeah, great.
And we need to get them. They're the ones
Yeah.
in the majority.
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you.
Oh, and let me add one thing, Becky, sorry.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
too, like if you can figure out, like on social media, if you're in some Facebook groups, figuring out people, even if they can't be at the Capitol, but constituents of these particular targets. Actually, I've got a social media contact with X person, and they are in Senator so-and-so's district, who's a Republican who we think might be able to be swayed. Then having those folks reach out, even if they can't be at the Capitol, asking for a Zoom, all that is a way that you can be helpful by just doing like the connecting.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. A question from Ted Golden. Given dramatic increase in violence in our schools and communities, any chance that there might be legislation to increase arts, music, athletics funding in public schools?
I have not read that that's gotten particular scrutiny within the discussions about QBE. I think that most people do tend to agree that those areas, creative areas, are incredibly important for development and mental health, as well as sort of enjoyment and sticking with school. But again, we're not a top funder of the arts. We're not a top funder of schools or those programs within schools, and we're not a top funder of the arts in general. So again, advocacy around all of that is really important.
Okay, great. And Representative Clark, any thoughts about what we might be seeing or should be expecting in terms of reproductive rights this year?
So, I think the latest, and you all can correct me if I'm wrong, because all of this was happening all at the same time as like elections and runoffs. But I think the latest was that the courts have ruled that HB 481 is unconstitutional, because even though Roe v. Wade was overturned, the bill was passed prior to that overturning. So if the bill is passed when it was unconstitutional, you can't like retroactively make it constitutional just because now the rules have changed. And so, the courts are going back and forth on this, but I would expect that the governor is probably going to ask that they just reintroduce a similar bill to now that Roe has been overturned. Now, how that works, I don't know, because I don't know how that works. And the reason why I say I don't know how that's going to work is because we have so many new people and I don't know their stances on these things. And when I'm talking about new people, I'm talking about on the Republican side. If you remember in 2019, when we debated that bill on the House side, it barely passed. It was already hard enough for them to get it passed when they had more people. And so now, you know, who knows what'll happen. But I do think it will come back up. Along with that, I do think that we're going to see some restrictions on medical abortion, like the abortion pill. They tried that in the last session, and it literally got all the way up to sine die. I literally had a speech written ready to go to the well to speak on it, and it just never got called up in the House. But it made it all the way to the rules calendar, which is a calendar that's, you know, the vote or the bills that we will vote on. It made it all the way to the rules calendar on sine die and could have been called up at any time. So because it made that journey as far as it did, I would be very surprised if it does not come back. I also know that we have a few more extremists in positions of power in the state of Georgia, unfortunately. And so I would not be surprised if we don't see some red meat bills that are just really extreme bills. And then the question is, will the likes of, I think it's Matt Brass, Elena, you can correct me if I'm wrong, whoever decides what bills make it to the floor. I think it's Matt Brass on y'all's side.
We expect him to be rules chair.
Yes. So, you know, and isn't that who decides what bills come to the Senate floor for debate?
Yeah, I mean, he has
Yeah.
a big role within that
Yes.
discussion.
So, trying to figure out like what they will do, along with, again, we have a new speaker. We don't know if he's going to try to be more of that moderate with a little dash of extremism every now and then, just to make sure people still believes he's a conservative like Ralston, or for, we don't know. And so I think we just need to be prepared for it. And I think I hope that there's not an appetite for this type of legislation. Deborah Silcox is one of those people who had to vote no the first time for this stuff. And guess what? Now she's back.
Yeah.
And they drew her a district. And so it's almost like it's like, it's you, Deborah. Every time you're here, we get these bills. No, just kidding. But, I just expect to see some of those things. So, I mean, we're going to have to be on our toes. There's just so many unknowns. I hate to say, oh, I know for a fact this is going to happen, because we just don't know.
Yeah, that's super helpful. One last question. How do you expect the legislature to deal with the Public Service Commission redistricting court order for either of you?
I suspect that they will not take it up until they have to, right? Until appeals are exhausted. And if they are confronted with a final order that the maps violate the Voting Rights Act, then they will have to take action. As I do expect bills to be introduced on abortion, but I would not be surprised if they say, let's just, especially on trying to re-up 481, which is what got, temporarily, well, it was deemed unconstitutional by the Superior Court Judge Robert McBurney in Fulton County, but allowed to continue to be into effect while appeals are being considered. I would not be surprised if they did not try to vote on that again unless forced into it via an order from the Supreme Court that would say, indeed, it is unconstitutional. Mostly because neither of those things are an easy vote. Number one, 481, they may not have the votes to get that again. It'll be a big fight, a big spectacle. And number two, on the PSC, they like it the way it is. So they're probably not going to actually go to single member districts and voting in single member districts unless they're forced to.
So in Public Service Commission, are we still waiting for more rulings? They haven't been exhausted yet. Okay, great. Thank you. I am aware that it's after 5, and I just am so grateful. We love both of you so much. We are so grateful, and we call on us to be your foot soldiers whenever. We will be there. So please, please let us know what you need from us and we will show up. And great gratitude for coming and giving us this preview. And just if thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank
Thank
you,
all
and
of
all
you.
blessings to you for the assembly.
Yes.
Thank
you
y'all
guys
so
too.
much. Yes.
Appreciate you very much. Thanks for the
Likewise.
invitation.
Thank.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye. Now, let's see, Becky, okay, I'm going to call on you again to give us a brief overview of the calendar work for 2023, okay?
Yes, yes. Okay, so I want at this time, before we actually talk about the 2023 calendar and before we turn to what troubler priority setting might look like, I do want to say just a little bit about context. And I want to do this by way of transitioning from 2022 to 2023. And and I want to do this by showing you some photographs. So let me share my screen because several of us went to the swearing in of Representative Amani Barnes yesterday. And it was so uplifting and so moving and so inspiring and such a reminder of why we do this work and such a manifestation of so much hard work of many troublers over the course of last year. And it was just brought, I think those of us that were there made us pause and appreciate why we do this work. Because getting a state senator elected, a state representative into office is no small feat, and it is a large thing to do, and it is a tremendous thing to see the fruits of so much of everybody's labor. And I just want to say the names of Representative Imani Barnes and Representative Dr. Jasmine Clark and Senator Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock. And by God, nice 2022 work, y'all. Huge, huge, huge work. And so great gratitude, great appreciation, great admiration for everything that that everybody did. And I'm also very aware that so many troublers left it all on the field, gave it everything, and worked their hearts out. And I'm also aware that people are a little bit tired. And so what I want to say, I just want to set a little bit of an intention about this year. Michelle Obama, one of my favorite things that she ever said was she said, every year is an election year. And every year is an election year. And this year is an election year. But my hope for us all as a state and as necessary troublers is that it won't be a hair on fire election year. You know, it will be the kind of election year and the kind of legislative session that we keep going, you know, and we keep moving Georgia forward and we keep moving it away from its Confederate past and into a genuinely inclusive future. And we keep strengthening the pillars of democracy and we keep fighting for good and we keep stoking the fires of good work and of democratic principles. And hopefully we do it by finding work that is meaningful and nourishing, and that this year is not a bleed out, right? So I just want to say again, my hope and intention, this is not a hair on fire year. And this is the year of finding places where we can make a difference and keep it going and lay the foundation for next year. So on that note, let me share my screen and let me share some specifics about what this year is likely to look like, especially, whoops, in terms of calendar. Okay, let me move this forward. Forgive me. So we're going to talk about the calendar. We're going to talk about three things in this section. We're going to talk about a general calendar of what the year looks like. We're going to talk about troubler priority setting. And very specifically, since it starts tomorrow, we're going to talk about necessary trouble and the Georgia General Assembly and some proposals for how we do that work this time. So in terms of the legislative calendar, the General Assembly begins tomorrow. On the 28th day of the legislative session, there is crossover day, and a reminder that what that means is that any bills that have not moved from one chamber to the other are dead on that day. And then the final day will be the 40th day. We don't know exactly what day that's going to be, but it's going to be roughly the end of March. So we're really looking at the rest of January, at February, and at March in terms of legislative work. And it's, again, it gets more heated up the further into it we get. And as Jasmine reminded us, it's always the first couple of weeks, it's a little bit of a slow roll. The electoral calendar. This is the year for two things. One is municipal races, and that means mayor, it means city council races, it means school boards that are associated with a city. And this is also the year of some special elections, some of which will be important. I want to say something about municipal races. Those of you who know me that I love municipal races. I think that municipal races are incredibly important because they are how we build the Democratic bench. Ostensibly, they are nonpartisan, but we always know which are the Democrats and who are not. And it's how we cultivate it's how we build really great new candidates. I want to remind us all that we started supporting Amani Barnes in her municipal race for the Tucker City Council. So there is lots that happens in municipal races. It's very, very possible to make a big difference because they're small. So in terms of the municipal races, kind of spring and summer will be spent on candidate recruitment and getting a sense of which are the municipal areas where there's a real chance of making a significant difference. We'll be talking a lot more about municipals and hearing about municipals. In August, the week has not been set yet, but sometime in August, there will be candidate qualifying for those municipals. And then November 7th is actually the election day for municipals. And so again, we'll be returning to this, but I just wanted folks to kind of have a general sense. In terms of special elections, as you guys know, is when somebody resigns, when somebody dies in office. For instance, David Ralston's seat is there's a special election runoff. We have a handful of special elections that are actually happening on January 31st. There will be other legislative special elections, my guess is, during the course of the year. And then there are the Public Service Commissioner special elections, which will be sometime this year, and these are a very big deal. This is really an opportunity for us to see if we can get some Democratic representation on the Public Service Commission, because right now it is all Republican, and we have a couple of terrific candidates. A reminder that what happened last year is we had the primary for these races, and Patty Durand won for District 2, Sheila Edwards won for District 3. And the tricky thing about public service commissioners is that they have to live in one particular district, but then they have to run statewide. And what this tends to do is make it very, very difficult for Black candidates to win. And there was an inquiry into the question of whether the fact that they have to live in this district and represent their district but run statewide actually is a violation of the Voting Rights Act. And so a suit was there was a lawsuit filed. There were several appeals, several rulings, and it has we are still waiting, as Senator Parent said, we are still waiting for the litigation to be completed in that. And once that litigation is completed, then those elections will be scheduled. We'll know what they're going to look like, and that is a significant opportunity to get Democrats in those offices. So big piece of special election work. So that's basically, that's kind of basically what the legislative calendar looks like and what the electoral looks like. There's not going to be any May primaries this year, so we're really looking at the specials, and then we're looking at the November municipals. In terms of troubler priorities, I want to say something about how we're going to be setting the necessary trouble kind of what our goals are, what our priorities are in certain key areas like legislatively, elections, which ones we're going to be entering into, voter protection, voter education, immigration, and environmental issues. Is that there are a few folks in each of those categories who have already put effort in, provided leadership in, who will be convening little groups, just small groups, not to do all the work of this, but just to propose some priorities in each of those areas. And what I would say is that if you have an interest in actually helping to set necessary trouble priorities in each of these areas, in one of these areas, and you haven't already been tapped, if you would just put your name in the chat and which one you're interested in, or send an email to me or Pat, and we will be so happy to hook you up. So because these groups are going to be meeting over the next month or 2 months, our priorities over the next year, for the course of this year, are going to be emerging slightly gradually. We're not just going to be laying it all out today. That said, since the legislative session actually starts tomorrow, we can't really wait on that one. And so there is a small group of folks who have been pulled together to think about, to propose some legislative priorities and how we work with this General Assembly that have already met once. And I'm going to ask Pat to say a little bit about what that little group is proposing, is how we do that, how necessary trouble interfaces with the Assembly this year. Pat, can I turn it over to you?
Yep. Robin Shahar, Karen Davenport, Aquaria Richardson Smith, and I've been talking about what's useful, reasonable, appropriate legislative work for necessary trouble. Generally, we've been talking in terms of what needs to be done, what necessary trouble should organize itself, and what should we just join up with other groups are already doing the organizing, and we can be just part of the process. And we're also thinking in terms of what work improves Georgia, but also what work improves troublers. And I think we've really been influenced by the work we did, especially for Monty Barnes, but also for Jasmine Clark, where we worked to help them get elected or reelected, but we learned a lot. We came out of those improved as advocates and improved with our knowledge of how elections work and are effectively run. So we want to find ways that that we do things that help others, but also that we're improved in the quality of the work that we're doing. We've been thinking about the work of legislators in terms of the legislators have to draw up the state budget. That's, as Elena said before, the one thing in the Constitution, the Georgia Constitution, required of the legislature is to pull together the budget every year. They consider, pass, reject legislation. They work within their own political parties in the caucuses and in the state party framework. They help constituents and the towns and cities that are within their districts by being involved with the House and Senate legislative delegations. They're opinion leaders. They come to meetings like this one. They go other places in their districts and they talk about what's going on. So they have to be able to reach out to the people in their communities. And they have to raise funds. We've gotten messages recently from Jasmine and from Elena about how they're not provided with staff and that they need money for staff to run their offices. So when we think about what a legislator does, it's not just that they're in there doing bills and fighting and getting those done, but they have this enormous range of tasks where we might be helpful in some ways we haven't thought about before. So our conclusion so far, there are things that we want to join or support or publicize, amplify, but we don't want to plan them ourselves. And the fight against bad legislation, there are major nonprofits who are going to take on that work, and they can organize it. They have paid staff, they can organize it, and we can go and know what to do and help out. And we can put updates information so that everybody can find the ones that they want to do, but that we're not trying to be the ones that lead that fight. That can even be true for good legislation, that we would find out what other people are doing and help out. In the past, we've tried to keep a list of all the legislation that's being introduced and keep where it is and process and what's going on. And that's a real stretch for a small nonprofit like ours. Well, we're not even a nonprofit, a small group like ours. And what we're recommending is that we find the nonprofits that are doing that work and we follow it and we publicize it so we can keep up with it, but that we're not trying to do that work ourselves. So what do we think about things that we can do? We've helped to elect two fabulous people. And what we want to do is to work with them to see what we can do to help them be successful. If you remember in our last meeting, our post-election meeting, Amani was talking about wanting to do something to pass legislation for free school lunches. And Jasmine immediately spoke up and said, "Oh, I didn't know you were going to do that, but I'm really interested in that too." And that keeps kind of rattling around in our conversations is, what are their goals? What are Imani and Jasmine thinking that they want to achieve? And how can we find out and see what we can do to help them with that work? So one of the things we want to do is to work closely with the legislators that we've helped to elect and to support them to be successful in their ambitions. So that's where we are. Next steps, we're going to be talking with Imani and Jasmine about how we can help them. We realize that they're in very different places in their careers. Jasmine's very experienced, got a lot of contacts, has staff, or some staff, and Imani is just starting to figure out the system. So what we want to do is ask them, what of these many tasks that you have to do can we help you with? And then bring those back to troublers to see who wants to help with them. So we were gathering information, gathering ideas, and we're meeting on Fridays by Zoom. And we'd love to have people who are interested in this pursuit of what are we going to do, how are we going to help them, what kinds of tasks can troublers do that would make Imani or Jasmine more successful in achieving our mutual goals. If you're interested in joining with us, I think the thing to put would be GGA for Georgia General Assembly. Put GGJ in the chat and we'll get you connected. There you go, Becky.
Thank you, Pat. And that's a really great, that's a lovely example, not just of the legislative, what the legislative priority setting work group is doing, but that's an example of what we're asking these other little groups just to set the priority, not to do all the work. We'll invite everybody to do all the work, but to set how we want to approach certain things. And so again, if you're interested in participating in the elections conversation about priorities, or the immigration, environment, voter protection, voter education, put your name in the chat or send an email to one of us. And I am almost going to turn this back over to PJ, but PJ, before I do, Ted Golden just put an event in the chat that I would like. Ted Golden, can you hear me? I see you. Would you unmute yourself and would you just describe the event that you just put in the chat so that people can contact you if they are available and interested and willing?
Well, my friend Charles Alphen from the King Center, he's one of the senior trainers, has decided that he wants to do a bus trip to Birmingham to see the museums, and then to Mississippi to go to the sites where Emmett Till's situation occurred and Goodman, Cheney, and Swerner were killed. So he's going to do that. I think the last week in February, the 24th, I believe the date is he's talking about. It looks like it's going to be a one-day trip. We thought it might be overnight, but we're going to try to do a one-day trip. If you're interested, just text me and let me know. The cost is right around $40 to $50 probably. If we have to spend the night, it may triple to 150. But if you're interested in going, just text me 770-715-5471 or email me at trgolden359@gmail.com.
And
go ahead.
And Ted, we will send this out in the follow-up. We have also, Mary Lou and I took a trip with Ted and Charles Alphen to Selma, and it was extraordinary. And we've also talked to Ted about at some point this year asking Ted and Charles if they would lead a troubler trip like that as well. So that is also, maybe we don't let this conversation about 2023 pause without saying that that's also our hope and intention, is to find ways of continuing that kind of work. So PJ, I'm going to turn this over to you again.
Okay, Becky, thank you so much. For everyone, the next meeting will be off schedule. It'll be February the 19th rather than February the 12th. And that's because of the Super Bowl conflict. So we want to make sure anybody wants to watch the Super Bowl, you can on the 12th. We won't bother you, okay? Now, I want to invite, now those who have to leave at this point, we want to thank everyone for coming. And like I said, have a wonderful year. But for those who can stay with us for another maybe 8 or 10 minutes, I would like to invite you to stay and because you're in for a treat, is what I'm trying to say, okay? So those who have to leave, we've enjoyed it. We love you. Have a wonderful month until we see you next time. And for those who can stay, Becky has a wonderful treat for us, okay? Becky?
Thank you, PJ. Thank you, PJ. And actually also before we leave entirely, the conversation about next month, in February, we'll be hearing from David Pepper, who is extraordinary, and also about data related to democracy and and the last election, and Kimberlyn Carter will be speaking to us about Georgia data in February. But this next, the 8 to 10 minutes the 8-minute clip felt like a little too long to incorporate into a regular meeting. But if anybody has not seen the Hakeem Jeffries speech that he got when he was elected unanimously for the 15th time, and he finally got to accept his position as minority leader, it is a barn burner. And it made me so proud to be a Democrat. So we would invite you to stay and watch that speech together if you have 8 more minutes. And we're going to, if the whole thing is 15 minutes, I've kind of shaved a little bit off the beginning and a little bit off the end. But it's fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully you will also enjoy it as much as an awful lot of us have. And let me say, he's just finished thanking the people who put his name into the hopper 15 times. So here we go.
Goose and Veronica Escobar. I also want to thank my colleagues, my friends in the House Democratic Caucus for your perseverance, for your strength, for your friendship, for your unanimity of purpose, and for your unanimous support. And I simply want to say that that showing of strength is not for any one particular individual. It will be a showing of strength throughout the 118th Congress, unanimity of purpose on behalf of the American people. Before I proceed any further, let me begin by acknowledging the distinguished gentle lady from the great state of California, the iconic, the heroic, the legendary Speaker Emerita, Nancy D'Alessandro Pelosi. And without question in my mind, Speaker Emerita Pelosi will go down in history as the greatest speaker of all time. Throughout her time in Congress, she's been a legendary legislator, a fabulous facilitator, and a no-nonsense negotiator. We know that Nancy Pelosi is a woman of faith, a loving wife, a mother of 5, a grandmother of 9, a defender of democracy, a voice for the voiceless, and a powerful champion for the children, the climate, Charm City, California, the caucus, the Congress, the country, and the Constitution. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for all that you have done. It's an honor to stand on your broad shoulders, as well as the shoulders of the great Steny Hoyer and the great Jim Clyburn, 2 consequential leaders in their own right. Now, the scripture says in Galatians, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time, we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Over the last 2 years, House Democrats, in partnership with President Biden and our colleagues in the Senate, have been hard at work on behalf of the American people, getting big things done. We passed the American Rescue Plan, saved the economy from a deep recession, put shots in arms, money in pockets, and kids back in school. We passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to create millions of good-paying jobs, fix our crumbling bridges, roads, tunnels, our airports, a sewer and water system, our mass transportation systems, and ensure high-speed internet access in every single community. We passed gun safety legislation for the first time in 30 years that will save lives and make our communities safer. We passed the Chips and Science Act to bring domestic manufacturing jobs back home to the United States of America and ensure that our workforce has the skills to succeed in the 21st century economy. And we passed the Inflation Reduction Act to strike a dramatic blow against the climate crisis, set our planet on a sustainable trajectory forward, lower energy costs, strengthen the Affordable Care Act, lower health care costs, and drive down the high price of life-saving prescription drugs for millions of Americans. It was one of the most consequential Congresses in American history. President Biden gets the job done, and the D in Democrat stands for deliver. So over the next 2 years, over the next 2 years, as we begin this 118th Congress, let us continue to fight for lower costs. Let us continue to fight in this Congress for better paying jobs. Let us continue to fight in this Congress for safer communities. Let us continue to fight in this Congress to defend democracy. Let us continue to fight in this Congress to put and protect the public interest. Let us continue to fight in this Congress for economic opportunity in every single zip code. And let us continue to fight in this Congress for reproductive freedom. Because as Democrats, we do believe in a country for everyone. We do believe in a country for everyone, a country that provides for the poor, works for working families, makes sense for the middle class, stands up for senior citizens, innovates in the inner city, strengthens suburban communities, helps out the heartland, and revitalizes rural America. We believe in a country with liberty and justice for all, equal protection under the law, free and fair elections, and yes, we believe in a country with the peaceful transfer of power. We believe that in America, our diversity is a strength. It is not a weakness. An economic strength, a competitive strength, a cultural strength. Our diversity is a strength. It is not a weakness. We are a gorgeous mosaic of people from throughout the world. As John Lewis would sometimes remind us on this floor, we may have come over on different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. We are white, we are black, we are Latino, we are Asian, we are Native American, we are Christian, we are Jewish, we are Muslim, we are Hindu, we are religious, we are secular, we are gay, we are straight, we are young, we are older, we are women, we are men, we are citizens, we are dreamers. Out of many, we are one. That's what makes America a great country. And no matter what kind of haters are trying to divide us, We're not going to let anyone take that away from us, not now, not ever. This is the United States of America, a land of opportunity. The fact that I'm able to stand up here today is another data point in that narrative. I was born in Brooklyn Hospital, raised in a working class neighborhood in Crown Heights, grew up in the Cornerstone Baptist Church, started off in the cradle roll department, somehow survived the violence of the crack cocaine epidemic, and wound up here in the United States Congress as the highest ranking Democrat in the House of Representatives. America, truly a land of opportunity. Government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So on this first day, let us commit to the American dream, a dream that promises that if you work hard and play by the rules, you should be able to provide a comfortable living for yourself and for your family, educate your children, purchase a home, and one day retire with grace and dignity. Let us commit on this first day to lift up the American dream for every single person in this nation. Now, I recognize that this is a moment of transition. As we transition from one Congress to the next, from one majority to the next, from a year of accomplishment to a year of ambiguity, a moment of transition. The American people, understandably, after the events of this week, recognize that the Congress is at a fork in the road and are asking the question, what direction will we choose? On this first day, I do not pretend to answer that question on behalf of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, but we do extend our hand of partnership to you and want to make clear that we extend and intend to try to find common ground whenever and wherever possible on behalf of the American people. Not as Democrats, not as Republicans, not as independents, but as Americans. But I also want to make clear that we will never compromise our principles. House Democrats will always put American values over autocracy, benevolence over bigotry, the Constitution over the cult, democracy over demagogues, economic opportunity over extremism, freedom over fascism, governing over gaslighting, hopefulness over hatred, inclusion over isolation, justice over judicial overreach, knowledge over kangaroo courts, liberty over limitation, maturity over Mar-a-Lago, normalcy over negativity, opportunity over obstruction, people over politics, quality of life issues over QAnon, reason over racism, substance over slander, triumph over tyranny, understanding over ugliness, voting rights over voter suppression, working families over the well-connected, xenial over xenophobia, yes we can over you can't do it, and zealous representation over zero-sum confrontation. We will always do the right thing by the American people. So let us not grow weary of doing good, for the American people will reap the benefit of the harvest if we do not give up. God bless you, God bless the House, and God bless the United States of America.
Don't Democrats have the best peeps?
That was awesome. That was awesome.
PJ, can we just all turn our mutes off and just give a little hoot and holler to enter into 2023 and to wrap up 2022?
Yes, we can.
Yay!
Everybody unmute. All right, all right.
Right.
That was awesome.
Wow, that was
awesome.
amazing.
That was amazing.
Yeah. He went from A to Z.
Yes, he
That's
did.
right. That's
He
true.
did. And can't he?
I love
Can't
that.
he
I
give
love
a
it.
speech,
I love it.
man?
Yeah, that was
Preach,
good.
Hakeem. Woo!
Exactly.
I loved watching it again with you all. That made it so much better.
Yes.
Right. I was so excited, people.
You know, it's time for us to pay dues in our subdivision. So I'm going to invite these ladies over, and I'm going to put that speech on in addition to everything else. Okay.
Talk it to him.
Okay. Okay.
Oh.
All right. So
Bye, everyone.